Yo, what's good E7 fam? Pat here, back with another how to play guide, and in this one we'll be talking about the white-haired waifu who doesn't know where babies come from, Emilia. As with all of my how to play videos, I'll be going super in-depth and covering almost everything you could want to know about the character, including things like their stats, their skills, some possible in-game equipment builds for you to try out, as well as some PvP matchup knowledge if that's your thing. So, with the introduction out of the way, let's talk about Emilia's stats. Emilia is an Ice Soul Weaver of the Gemini zodiac symbol. She shares a stat line with Diane as well as Elena. She has 649 attack, 5,254 health, 103 speed, 694 defense, 15% critical hit chance, 150% critical hit damage, 5% dual attack chance, no effectiveness, and 18% starting effect resistance. Overall, a very poor stat line for a 5-star in Epic 7, but Soul Weavers traditionally do have very bad stats. Just like we talked about with DN, the highlights here are the starting speed, the starting defense, and the starting effect resistance. All of these are very good as far as Soul Weavers are concerned. As a bit of trivia before moving on to the skill section, in all versions of Epic 7 as well as ReZero itself, Emilia is voiced by Rie Takahashi. Riri is no stranger to the voiceover artist industry. If you're familiar at all with Japanese voice actresses, she's literally everywhere anymore, especially if you play a lot of gacha games. You can hear her as Hutao from Genshin Impact, Sumi from Rent a Girlfriend, and you can also hear her as our resident eggplant Kohai and the current poster child of the Fate franchise, Mashu Kirilight. However, the role that I think most of you will know her for is as the girl who yells explosion a lot, Megumin from Konosuba. Emilia's S1 is Huma. It has a 0.95x attack multiplier. It heals the character on Emilia's team with the lowest HP by 7 to 8.75% of Emilia's maximum health, depending on Molagora. This S1 may look similar to other Soul Weaver S1s, specifically Key to an Oath from Well of Light, as well as Destina. It has a similar function to those skills, but the multipliers on them are quite different. After all, Ruel of Lights, for example, has a health and attack scaling component. After her rework, Destina's multiplier is much lower than Emilia's at around 6% when compared to Emilia's 7+%. And you may also recall that Ruel's multiplier scales off of the ally's maximum health instead of her maximum health. This means that Emilia's S1 is more predictable than Ruel of Lights, as well as more potent than Destina's. As an aside, wasn't Huma supposed to be the name of the barrier skill in ReZero, and Alhuma was the one that launched the ice shards? Whatever. Emilia's S2 is her signature skill, Spirit's Blessing. You acquire 1 soul upon use, and it has a 2 to 3 turn cooldown depending on Molagora. It dispels 2 debuffs from an ally other than Emilia before granting them an attack buff for 2 turns and increasing their combat readiness between 40 to 50% depending on Molagora. After that, Emilia increases her own combat readiness by 25%. This is a really insane S2 because it is on a very short cooldown. It is a dispel. It does provide attack buff, which is the most relevant buff in the game, and it functions in a similar fashion to the S2 skill on Lots as well as auxiliary Lots. This means that Emilia is not only a general purpose cleanser and buffer for your team, but she can also be used to set up some very powerful cleave style strategies because, again, she functions very similar to Lots and auxiliary Lots. Emilia's S3 is Divine Protection of the Great Spirit. You acquire 3 souls upon use, and it has a 4 to 5 turn cooldown depending on Molagora. This move dispels 2 debuffs from all allies before healing them for 15% of Emilia's maximum HP. Additionally, this skill provides a barrier to all allies for 2 turns. That barrier strength is proportional to 20% of Emilia's maximum HP. Another really strong and good general purpose Soul Weaver skill, you'll notice that Emilia is kind of like a mishmash of DN skills kind of rearranged and put together in various different areas. Having a cleanse on a character as well as a heal and a barrier is always a bonus for any support skill. And that barrier that we get is actually pretty beefy when you think about it. It's going to translate to roughly 3,000 to 4,000 HP depending on how you have Emilia built, which is slightly below the performance of Fallen Cecilia's barrier. If you recall, that barrier is roughly 35 to 4,500 HP, but it's still a really good barrier. It's not bad by any means. There are a lot worse ones in the game. It's just not one of the absolute best ones, but it doesn't really need to be because, again, Emilia has so many good general purpose Soul Weaver skills, as well as that really powerful S2 CR push with an attack buff, so you don't really care about it too much. Emilia's Soulburn adds a heal to her S2. That heal is equal to 20% of Emilia's maximum health, which translates to a 3,000 to 4,000 HP heal, depending again on how you have Emilia built. It's fine to spend 10 souls, in my opinion, on this if you feel that a hero needs it. If that healing is going to keep somebody alive and make sure they don't die, then by all means, you can definitely use it. It is a fairly solid soul burn overall. When it comes to Molagora priorities, I think you want to max the S2 Spirit's Blessing first because the combat readiness push on this move is insane and can decide quite a number of games in PvP. It's the primary reason you're probably picking Emilia, so therefore I would max that first. After that, I would get the -1 turn cooldown on her S3 Divine Protection of the Great Spirit so that you can use it more often and keep your team healed up and keep any potential debuffs off of them. And then after that, I would take the S1 Huma to at least +5 so that you get the maximum amount of healing out of the character. If you didn't skip the trivia section in this video, then you'd know that Emilia is voiced by Rie Takahashi. She is someone who is no stranger to voicing various different gacha game characters. In fact, her track record with characters like Hu Tao from Genshin Impact and Mashu Kirilight from Fate Grand Order suggests that she really only voices borderline OP characters. When ReZero got announced for Epic 7, I was pretty excited as I was a fan of the series. That said, I kind of felt deep down that Emilia would be the superior of the two characters coming out of this collab, because as I previously stated, Riri really only plays the broken characters. And Emilia definitely is on that line when it comes to broken characters. She's not as oppressive as some of the 7 Great Disasters or their newest inductee Hua Young, but she's definitely pushing it. She is a Soul Weaver that can do almost everything Diane can do, while also having a 2-turn cooldown 50% combat readiness push with an attack buff stapled onto it that she can give to one ally. She's essentially Diane and Oxlots on one character when you think about it, and that thought is terrifying. Games can end before they even start if Emilia is one of the first characters to take a turn. She can CR push a character like Little Queen Charlotte or Hua Young right to the top of the list and win the game on the spot for her team. Heroes such as Landy can take a frightening amount of turns with Emilia backing her up because for some reason Spirit's Blessing is only on a 2-turn cooldown and also CR pushes Emilia herself. If you're serious about PvP at all, you should strongly consider acquiring Emilia and having her built. If PvP isn't your thing, however, Emilia is still a great unit for you to pick up. She provides a lot of useful support skills such as barriers, heals, and cleanses, which make her a very solid pick in both Advent and Abyss, and those are two of the hardest pieces of PvE content that we have. Perhaps her only major drawback is that her healing potency is a lot lower than a dedicated healer such as Ruel of Light, so do keep that in mind if you're planning to play her in PvE. I'm going to start by showing you a general use Emilia that can work in PvE as well as PvP that you can adjust to fit your needs for the character. After that, we'll talk about a specific variation of the first build that is designed to take turn 1 in higher end PvP games. So let's start by taking a look at that general use Emilia. For the first build, we're going to be on a speed set with a resist offset. If you only plan to use Emilia as a general use Soul Weaver in PvE, you don't really need the resist set. You can use a different offset such as health, defense, or whatever have you. Taking a look at the desired stats, we have 1,174 attack. That is Emilia's base attack with an I-90 sword. Defense is 1,500 so that she has some level of bulk and is much harder to kill. Then we have 15k HP. This gives her, again, some level of bulk, makes her harder to kill in PvE as well as PvP. I would not go too much lower than this. The heal potency kind of just takes a bit of a slide at that point, and she's a bit easier to kill. If you can go higher than this, by all means, especially if you're trying to play her only in PvE. In PvE, you could probably get her to like 18 or 19k health if you do not care about effect resistance. If you want to actually just use her in PvP, and again, don't care too much about effect resistance, you can drop it to 100% and instead juice the health up again to like 18 or 19k if you can. You should always be trying to get Emilia's health as high as you can without sacrificing too many of the other stats. For the speed, I have 230. This is very akin to what a general use DN used to look like back in seasons 1, 2, and 3 of RTA. It is essentially 12 speed average per piece. I feel like that is obtainable for most intermediate and late game players. That is only really 2 to 3 good speed rolls in a piece. For the most part, it should, again, be fairly obtainable, I feel like, for, again, most intermediate and late game players. If you can go faster than this, as always, feel free to do so. Don't go too much slower than this, I feel, for the most part, unless you're going to be using her strictly in PvE. I think she'll just be a bit too slow for you to play her in PvP. The crit hit chance, crit hit damage, and effectiveness are all base values because we don't actually need them. We're not a damage dealer. We're not a debuffer. Looking at the effect resistance, I have 150%. If you are a PvE player, you pretty much only really need like 85, so you can drop this a ton and use it towards speed, defense, and health if you so choose. If you are a PvP player, 150% is a good starting point for you until you approach the champion, emperor, or legend ratings, in which case this number will need to be higher and will need to be about 200%. And when we factor it in with the recommended artifact, which will be Bastion of Hope for this build, it needs to be about 270 to 280% if you can get it, again, at those higher tiers of play. Taking a look at the right side gear, we are on an HP percentage necklace with an effect resistance ring. Although, again, if you don't need effect resistance, you don't care about it as much in PvP, or for some reason, you're only using her in PvE, you can go with an HP percentage ring instead. Boots are speed so that we can cycle our turns in a timely manner and get as many S2s as possible off on our Emilia. Artifact, as we already talked about, is Bastion of Hope because it gives us a ton of extra effect resistance and let us do our job. If we were playing Emilia for just general support and not for her cleansing capabilities, it would be better to play a speedy build like the one we're going to be talking about after this. Other artifacts you can consider if your Bastion is occupied are Guardian Ice Crystals, because that is the one that's on her banner. I honestly think Guardian Ice Crystals is probably the best general use artifact for her. It's amazing in almost any scenario, so if you're not sure, slap Guardian Ice Crystals on her. Bastion of Hope is here, again, largely because it is free. Everyone has access to it, and it really helps solidify her role as a cleanser and makes it harder for characters like Angel of Light and Angelica to disable her. I also have Water's Origin listed here, but that is essentially just a catch-all. You can play whatever Soul Weaver artifact. If for some reason you don't have Guardian Ice Crystals and your Bastion is occupied, you can choose Magaraha's Tome, Water's Origin. There's a ton of great Soul Weaver options. I leave it to you to experiment if you're not going to use the two that I recommend, but I really do think Bastion of Hope and Guardian Ice Crystals covers like 99% of players on what they'd be wanting to play on Emilia. Taking a look at the per piece average, we have 14% defense, 10% HP, 12 speed, and 9% effect resistance. The second build to discuss with Emilia is an offshoot of the first, like we talked about. It is a speedy opener. Looking at the primary sets, we are still on speed resist, although since speed is the name of the game, you can play any offset that you want, including a broken set, if that will help you get a faster Emilia. You really need to push speed more than anything on this build, and if you have to sacrifice things like defense or effect resistance to get it, then so be it. Looking at the desired stats, we have 1174 attack. That is the same as the last build. Defense, I have sacrificed a little bit to go to 1400 defense. I wouldn't go too much lower than like 1300 defense. If you have to sacrifice it, by all means, but I really wouldn't go too low on defense. It just makes Emilia very squishy. I understand that if you get the turn one, you might win the game, but if you for some reason don't, she's basically a sitting duck and becomes very easy to pick off. Health is still 15k for the same reasons. We still want her to have some level of bulk if we can get it to play a prolonged game in case things go wrong. Again, don't go too much lower than this. You make the heals and the barriers on the character a lot worse if you're going too much lower than this. As always, get as much extra health as you can after you've met your speed goals. For speed, I have 260. This is going to be very hard, I feel like, for a lot of you watching this video to hit. That is 17 per piece average. That is very, very high. But if you are trying to play Emilia as a turn 1 opener in these higher tiers, you really do need some of your best speed gear on her in order to make it happen. The current season, as of the recording of this video, gives an extra 15 speed to Soul Weavers. So this is essentially a 275 speed Emilia inside of RTA. And I have played against ones that are in the 280 to 290 range. So it is definitely possible with some very premium speed gear. Again, I assume that most of you who have speed gear that is over the 16 to 17 speed barrier, you probably have a lot of like random stats or very low stats overall, which is why I made a cut to things like defense, and I'm going to make a cut as well to effect resistance. If we jump all the way down to ER, we have 103%. That is our base effect resistance with an effect resistance ring as well as the resist set. If you are just focusing on speed and you just want to get rid of all the ER to make it happen, you are welcome to do so. I still want at least 100 ideally, so that way a DPS with like a stun that doesn't build any effectiveness can't actually get to my Emilia, and she has some level of cleansing capability again if the game goes long. But if you really are just trying to push for that turn 1 Emilia, you can scrap all of the effect resistance and some of the defense in order to make that speed happen. Taking a look at the right side, I'm on an HP percentage necklace, although you could be on a defense percentage necklace or even a flat HP or flat defense necklace, whatever you have speed for, because again, the primary goal of this build is to take turn 1. We need to be very, very fast on our Emilia to take turn 1 and really leverage that S2 CR push in order to translate it into a game win. Looking at the ring, I'm still on effect resistance for the reasons I talked about on the previous slide, although you can again be on HP percentage, defense percentage, flat HP, or even flat defense. It depends entirely what is in your box, what has the highest amount of speed gear. The boots are speed because, again, we're trying to be as fast as possible. For this one, since we are sacrificing almost all of our effect resistance, I wouldn't go Bastion of Hope. Instead, I would go Guardian Ice Crystals because it provides you some healing as well as some protection for your teammates. I think it is still the best general use artifact on Emilia. Other ones I have listed here are just Water's Origin as well as etc. That is, again, because Soul Weavers just have so many good artifact choices. If you don't have Guardian Ice Crystals, you can try Water's Origin, Magara's Tome, even Idol's Cheer. Whatever works for you, experiment and try it out. Looking at the per piece average, I have 11% defense, 10% HP, 17 speed per piece average, as well as some flat HP and defense for your leftover stats. Just like in the show, Emilia is kind of friends with everyone, although there are a couple of characters that I want to highlight in this section. The S2 on Emilia is incredibly powerful, and when combined with certain heroes that have very strong S3s, it is completely debilitating and or game winning in a lot of scenarios for you. So you're going to want to be on the lookout for characters like that. For mitigation sources, your best choices are going to be Crimson Armin and surprisingly Arya of all characters. Obviously, if your Emilia goes first or second, you can boost Crimson Armin to the front if your opponent is going to be taking the second, third, and fourth turns, and so on and so forth. If you notice a huge gap between when Emilia goes and when the rest of your team goes, like if their entire team is sandwiched in the middle, you can boost Crimson Armin to the front and have her use her S3 to protect your entire team, and that really shuts down your opponent's offense, at least for one rotation. Arya is a very similar story. If you boost Arya up to the front and have her stealth your entire team and sit behind her counter and defense buffs, then if they have a team that's comprised only of single target DPS, say like Apocalypse Robbie or Hua Young, it's going to be very difficult for them to force through any damage unless they're willing to take a ton of counterattacks from Arya, which could lead to big damage or a lot of stuns depending on what artifact and what build you actually have the character on. Other characters to highlight are strong single target DPS characters like Luna, Little Queen Charlotte, and Hua Young. All of these characters are incredibly potent, have very strong one-shot abilities on their S3s. So by boosting them to the front and giving them an attack buff, it's pretty much lights out for most characters in the game. This is an incredibly potent strategy, by the way, in Guild War offense. Using Emilia to boost characters like these to the front can make your life a lot easier. So I highly recommend pairing her with these characters. And the final two I want to talk about are Landy and Spectre Tenebria. These are hard carry DPS that usually sit in stealth, are very difficult to deal with for a lot of teams, and they pretty much clock your opponent. They just do so much damage that your opponent cannot withstand it for a very long time. By speeding up the clock with Emilia's S2, very few teams are going to last a long time against you, and you're just going to end up winning a lot of games as a result. Emilia's good matchups depend entirely on how you have her built based on which of the two builds you decide to go with that are in this video. If you went for the general use cleanser, then obviously Emilia is going to be great against teams that have a lot of debuffs. You think of characters like Peyra with her unbuffable and her restrict, or Angel of Light Angelica and her unbuffable and her silence. These are obviously characters that you're going to want to choose Emilia against because she will protect your team and get rid of those pesky debuffs. However, if you decide to go with a much faster version of Emilia, then she really excels against a lot of bruiser and turn 2 compositions. If your opponent has chosen no one that's really fast so far in the draft, it's probably a pretty good time to pick Emilia because you'll run circles around them with how many turns you'll be taking thanks to her S2. Surprisingly, Emilia has very few bad matchups. They are pretty pronounced though, and I will talk about them here. The character is not top tier for no reason. Again, in the good matchup section, it was pretty open-ended because she's good against a lot of stuff, and there's only a few things that she's really bad against. The most obvious things are characters like Politis, Celine, and even Teiyu. Anything that punishes non-attack skills, you are a character that has 2 non-attack skills, so these characters can really punish you. Teiyu, not so much. For the most part, I don't really think he's particularly strong in the meta, but if he ever gets a buff for completeness sake, I do want to put him here. Celine, I think, is a very 50-50 character when it comes to fighting Emilia. She's either the absolute worst possible matchup, or you can play around her depending on how they have the character built. Politis is the most general use answer to Emilia, and it's not perfect based on what else is in Emilia's draft, which is why I think you see Emilia picked so often, because even though these should be the 3 worst possible matchups, there are still outs to them. Even if you pick Emilia, they're not like auto bans for the most part. So that's already a good sign for our girl. Next up is Rimuru Tempest. He's pretty much the bane of most characters' existence in this game. If you don't have over 18k health and you're somebody that relies heavily on buffs or giving your team buffs, he's probably a bad matchup for you. He can potentially one-shot your Emilia based on how he's built. He can steal the attack buff from your team even if you boost up. He can basically follow whoever you're boosting up as well. So if you boost up any DPS and they take a turn and Rimuru still lives, his Analyze and Assess makes it his turn next, and then he can kind of reverse kill a character. So yeah, he's just very, very annoying to play against for the most part, and he's super, super rock solid against Emilia. And then the final 2 I want to talk about, if you are on a speed version of Emilia, Conqueror Lilius and Angel of Light Angelica are incredibly potent against you, because Conqueror Lilius will almost assuredly go before you, and she has a very good chance to actually provoke you. A lot of players will try to YOLO the S2 and try to get a provoke on your Emilia, especially if they see that they got an attack down from their S3 right off at the start of the fight. So yeah, if you have only a 100 effect resistance Emilia, you are super susceptible to her. And the same thing with Angel of Light Angelica. If she goes before you and she uses her S3 and unbuffles and silences your whole team, especially Emilia, you're getting no value out of Emilia, and it's just going to be very difficult, I think, for your team to actually succeed and win that match. And that's going to do it for how to play Emilia. When this collab was announced that it was coming back, I was almost positive that we were going to get Echidna, because Echidna basically prints money. She's super popular, and she's voiced by Sakamoto Maya. And that woman, almost any project that her name is attached to, just again prints money. So it's really surprising that we didn't get it here. Let me know down in the comments below if you wanted to see Echidna, or there was another ReZero character that you were expecting that didn't actually make it in. And if I missed anything in the guide, you can let me know down there below as well. If you want to see more how to play guides in this same style, there should be a playlist on your screen now. And as always, enjoy the rest of your day, the rest of your week, and I'll catch y'all in the next one. Later now.